everybody, to another episode of Inside Boxing Weekly on the Grueling Truth Sports Network, brought to you by Replenishing Care Technologies, Power Plus Mouthguards, and Gridiron Mo. I'm your host for the Inside Boxing Weekly show, Mike Goodpaster. Right now I want to welcome in my co-host, Jeremiah Preisser. How you doing, Jeremiah?
I'm doing very, very well. Mike, John, let's talk some boxing, guys.
And, of course, our other co-host, we call him Tonto, John Einreinhofer. How you doing, John?
Good to be here. I don't know who the Lone Ranger is, but...
well, then how did you know who Tonto was? Because you knew Tonto because you called it the Lone Ranger.
I always used to like Tonto, so I guess I'm okay with that.
Okay. Yeah, everybody liked Tonto better because the Lone Ranger was just, he was always throwing his white male privilege around on Tonto, so I always felt sorry for him.
And it kind of has a ring to it, doesn't it? John Tonto Einreinhofer. It's not bad.
There you go. And then we could have Jeremiah the Lone Ranger Preisser.
There we go. We got it.
All right. So here we go. We're going to start off. We had a huge week. We got probably more fights to talk about than we've had in the last month. We'll start off with Lee Selby with a unanimous decision win over Jonathan Victor Burgos. I'll tell you, Jeremiah, I was impressed by Selby. I know Burgos is the perfect style for him. He's an older veteran. He's one of those guys that's good enough to get to the top, but not to win when he gets there. But I thought Selby was impressive.
Yeah. I mean, I liked what I saw from Selby. I mean, from what I've seen from Selby for years now, I mean, he's always been a rock-solid boxer. I mean, the unfortunate thing is he doesn't have a whole lot of power. I mean, thankfully he was able to drop Barros in the 12th round. He's just not a big puncher. But Barros, to me, he played right into Selby's hands. I mean, he wasn't good at cutting off the ring. He was eating a lot of jabs. Selby looked accurate. He was landing a lot of good punches. I mean, I think it's a good step up. I mean, it's a good way to keep busy for him. I'm hoping that he finds – somehow they find a way to put him in with a Frampton or somebody else, because Selby is a PBC guy, and there are lots of options out there.
Yeah, and John, that brings me to my question. Selby, to me, looks like a good fighter, but is he good enough to mess with Santa Cruz, Frampton, guys like that?
He's got good skills. I think he is good enough to be in competitive fights with those guys. I don't think he'll beat them, as Jeremiah alluded to. He's not a power puncher. And one thing that's going to be part of my theme for tonight as we go over some of the fights is, Barros was an obviously overmatched opponent, and we don't really want to see these fights. Throw out the alphabet belts. But if they are going to happen, the one thing a fighter can try to do is get the guy out of there impressively. And that still probably doesn't mean that much, but it means more than cruising to the unanimous decision, not doing anything spectacular. If a fighter really wants to increase his marketing value, really wants to get some bigger fights, really wants to have the fans talking about him, get these overmatched guys out of there. And Selby's not a puncher, but still, Barros is somebody totally overmatched. And I think these fights are going to be set up, and these fighters are going to be in these positions. These are the kind of guys they got to get out of there.
All right, that brings us to the next fight. The main event on that one would have been Chris Eubank with a unanimous decision over the veteran Arthur Abraham. John, we'll start with you here. I thought this was as good as I've seen Eubank.
For me, that's Exhibit B of what I was just talking about. Abraham's not much of a threat at this point. He already got shut out by Gilberto Ramirez. Let's not forget that. So, he's in with Eubank. And, Eubank wins an easy unanimous decision. But
yeah, but you got to remember this, John, not to interrupt you, even though I just did, but Abraham's still better probably than anybody outside of Billy Joe Saunders that he's fought.
Sure he has. But, again, did Eubank get him out of there? And I know Abraham's a tough guy. I don't disagree with that. I agree he is. But this is my Exhibit B of the point I just made with Selby. You get in a fight like this, and Eubank was a heavy favorite. Abraham's 37 years old. He's at the down end. He's not punching with that much pop anymore either, when he even punches, which is very seldom. Get him out of there. The unanimous decision, okay, but it's not going to be a big eye-opener for me. for people that want to believe in Eubank, they can have it as an eye-opener. It's not for me. I sense that Eubank has defensive deficiencies that when he fights better fighters are going to be exploited. This super middleweight tournament field he's supposed to be in now, it's not all that impressive, but if he wants to show something and he's going to stay in this tournament, probably the most that could come out of this is, for he or Callum Smith, a fellow British fighter, win this tournament and, put yourself on the radar screen there, but it really will take that much, I think.
Yeah, Jeremiah, as we talked, the Super Series, great for boxing. The cruiserweight's stacked. At this division, not so much. I think Eubank probably is the favorite going into it. What do you think?
Well, I'm not quite sure. I mean, I think Callum Smith or George Groves are going to be up there. It's hard to really say, but from what I understand, Eubank is also willing to move back down to 160. And I think, looking at Billy Joe Saunders' recent performances and Chris Eubank Jr.'s performances, I actually think most people would favor Chris Eubank over Billy Joe right now, had they, if they were going to make the fight. So I think Chris Eubank's a good fighter. I mean, I think he's good enough to break the top 5 in one of these divisions. He's got good hand speed. He's got good technique. He throws a lot of punches. I mean, he seems to have a fairly good chin. I mean, I haven't seen him rocked yet, even against the lesser foes. I think Eubank's pretty good, but my only issue with him is I do recognize that it does seem like he's going to have defensive lapses, and against somebody like Golovkin, somebody with a good jab, it's going to eat him up. But my concern also is the fact that he doesn't look like he has really good power. I mean, Abraham ate a ton of punches and didn't really seem bothered by him. But, again, I think it's a good thing for him to be in the World Series.
Yeah, but how many guys have we seen knock Abraham out?
Well, Robert Stieglitz did it. I mean, it's, Stieglitz.
Yeah, but
did
I mean, he's fought a lot, and a lot of guys that could punch didn't put him down. So.
Right. But see, my thing is back nearer to his prime, Abraham at least threw a little bit more punches. But against Eubank Jr. here, I mean, he covered up a ton and just ate a bunch of punches, and didn't really seem to be too bothered. But I'm excited for him to be in the tournament. I'm hoping that him and his father. I hope they're willing to cede a little bit of control and we can get the good fights. Because, the potential with Callum Smith and George Groves, I mean, those are big sells in the UK.
Yeah, I think the difference is the cruiserweights are a little bit deeper. And, Bovada odds for the super middleweight. I figured I'd do this for John because he's always bringing up the odds. Callum Smith and George Groves are both 2-1 to win the tournament. Chris Eubank is at 5-2. So you got basically those 3 guys and then everybody else.
That makes sense.
And I like to look at that stuff, and I've seen Callum Smith as the favorite in some of the ones that I've seen. So, the
one here says it has been bouncing back and forth between Smith and Groves with Eubank closely behind. So right now it says they're both hovering around 2-1, and Chris Eubank is at 5-2. He's been as low as 3-1, but so I think it's between those 3 guys. Actually, I would favor Groves over the other 2.
I think Callum Smith has the most upside out of the 3 of them because he's got the size and the power. But we just have not seen him against any kind of real upper-level opposition yet. But I think this is his chance to make a mark and become a star. I would favor him, but, again, projecting a little bit when you're favoring him.
All right. Next up, we got Jezreel Corrales with a majority decision over Robinson Castellanos, or Castaneo, whatever the hell it is. But I know I'm close to having that one right, John.
Castellanos.
Yeah, Castellanos. But I can tell you this. I watched this fight. I thought Castellanos won the fight. I mean, what was your opinion, Jeremiah?
Well, I thought it was pretty close. I mean, I liked I liked his aggression, and he knocked Corrales down in round 4. But of course, he also got knocked down in round 7. But, I mean, I thought it was a pretty close fight. I mean, Corrales wasn't quite as slick as I had thought he was. I mean, after watching his fight against Uchiyama twice, I thought he was a little bit slicker, but I think it was just he was a bit better off because Uchiyama was a southpaw. But I was surprised because Castellanos, he's not really an offensive powerhouse. So the rate at which Castellanos was able to land was a bit surprising for me. But I kind of figured it was a 50-50 fight, and that's kind of how I scored it. I mean, to me, it was just about dead even. But it was a good fight, and I imagine that Corrales will move on to bigger and better things. I mean, he called out Burchelt. I'm not sure he can hang with Burchelt right now.
No. John, what was your take on the fight?
My take on it was I also thought it was close. But let me be a little bit cranky for a moment and say that this is, 17 divisions, all the belts. We pay for HBO. Were these two HBO premium cable quality fighters? Even though it was a close fight, wasn't a bad fight at all. I'm talking about the level of the fighters. To me, no. What we're paying. You're an HBO subscriber.
Yeah, but John, real quick to interject something. I've been on HBO forever, paid for it forever. And I would rather see a fight like this than one of them old fights where they put Shane Mosley against Willie Wise on the undercard of a fight. So I would rather see, there's 3 fights. To me, this was the bottom rung fight, even though I think it was in the middle. But considering that, for a 3-fight night, I think it's a decent matchup. I thought it was a good fight. And the main event disappointed me, but this probably was the fight of the night on that card. And I still like it better than when they used to bring their, the HBO house fighter and put him up against somebody that had no chance.
Oh, no, I agree with you there, Mike. And I agree with your point. You've made this on a couple of weeks, and I don't disagree with your point that, believe me, I'd rather see a good fight. I'm not saying that. But I'm asking for even a little bit more when we have to pay for this as boxing fans. I'm saying give me higher skilled guys in a good fight and even matchup. I agree with you. I don't want the thing where Terrence Crawford's in a showcase against some guy that's got no chance. That doesn't.
Yeah, so I'm all right with a fight like this if you've got a main event on top of it that deserves to be there, and I think the main event on top of it did deserve to be there.
Yeah, it was definitely a card HBO geared up for because you had good matchups with Miura and Burchell and Smith Jr. and Barrera. But and so I'm not being critical there. That's the kind of stuff we need to get on our HBO when we're paying for it as boxing.
Yeah, remember this in 1980, was it 80 or 81 when Jerry Cooney knocked out Ken Norton in 1 round? The undercard fight, the first fight was Marvis Frazier against Steve Zalski. So, but I think Miguel Montilla also fought Domingo de Ayala in the second fight. That was a pretty good fight. I don't even know why I brought that up, but it's just the fact that my memory is like before 1990.
No, I know what you mean there, but it was kind of quirky though then because that's when people weren't really relying on HBO for their good fights though. You still had network putting on top quality fights, and then you would have your pay-per-views thrown in there. So, of course you paid for HBO, but they were kind of a hybrid at that point where.
Yeah, but the one advantage right now, John, is this. If you compare this to 10 or 15 years ago where every month there was a pay-per-view fight that was HBO, I'll go with it. It's just, I haven't bought, let's see, I did buy Kovalev Ward, and the fight before that I paid for was Mayweather-Pacquiao, which I hate to admit to, but I did. So, that's twice, where it used to be probably 10 times a year I would buy a pay-per-view.
Well, right, but I think what you're talking about was the problem, and I totally agree with you. That was like the last 5 years before PBC came on the scene. 10, 15 years ago, you had HBO giving you a couple of good fights that you wanted to see every month. That was kind of, golden age of HBO to me. That's when they were at their high watermark with, people you wanted to see. A lot.
Yeah, I'd have thought the high watermark would have been like 1980 to like 1995. Maybe 2000.
Yeah, I think, right, HBO, you're talking late, not, they're kind of hitting their stride. Well, I know what you're saying. You're right. You're going kind of the tail end of the great early 80s age going into about 2000. Yeah, about 2000.
Yeah, you had the fights like McCrory and Donald Curry, stuff like that. I'm leaving out. But we did also, if you paid for HBO back then, you did pay to watch like Tim Witherspoon fight Greg Page.
Yeah, you were getting it all, but you were getting all the stuff. But you were getting all the stuff then. You didn't have to go to pay-per-view for a lot of those.
All right, let's go ahead. We'll move on to the next fight. And I wanted to bring this up real quick. Make sure you check out thegruelingtruth.net for all John's original 8 rankings, because John's cranky and old, and he don't think 17 divisions is right, and neither do I, and neither do Jeremiah. So he broke it down to the original 8. Huh?
I said, yeah, neither do I. I'm a little bit younger.
Yeah, and he's got the middleweights, which will be up this week. Also, we'll have a special guest this week. We're actually going to interview him after this show, Jeremiah, at 10:30. Gennady Golovkin's trainer, Abel Sanchez, will be on, so you can check that out on grillingtruth.net. That brings us to the next fight, which we had Sullivan Barrera with a unanimous decision over Joe Smith. Smith looked great early, knocked him down. We find out later Smith had to fight from the second round on with a broken jaw. This fight, going in, to me, was like a 50-50 fight. So really, the way Barrera dominated John was surprising to me. When you find out the broken jaw afterwards, maybe that probably did play a lot into it. But what was your take on Sullivan Barrera's performance against Joe Smith?
He did exactly what I thought he was going to do. I think that Joe Smith, to his credit, went the distance. Shabransky was not able to. Shabransky went through the meat grinder with him. I think actually that was the highlight for Joe Smith overall, was that considering he didn't have that much of an amateur career, and he is a big puncher, he's also got enough competent defensive skills. He was taking some shots, but he didn't get just ground up like Shabransky, who had amateur pedigree and is even bigger than Smith, and he also dropped Barrera in that fight. So I think, despite the fact that Barrera clearly won, I think there were some positives there for Smith. And let me say one thing. I'm not saying Joe Smith doesn't have a broken jaw, but I've got to treat him like I've treated other fighters we've talked about on here, which, let it be known, boxing's the toughest sport, the most dangerous sport. You take the most risks getting in there. But I'm going to say it again. Fans have to have at least a little bit of skepticism. They don't get medical records released. There's no standard of proof as to what the injuries are. I'm not saying Joe Smith didn't get a broken jaw. I'm not saying Kell Brook didn't get a broken eye socket. Can I say for sure Manny Pacquiao hurt his shoulder or not against Mayweather? I mean, he may have. All these things may have happened. But we don't get medical records released. We get promoters talking. We get fighters' managers talking, sometimes the fighters themselves. And we're getting a trend now where every time somebody has a performance that it didn't turn out the way that they would have liked, immediately we've got promoters and managers and fighters talking about injuries. Again, I'm not saying they didn't happen. I'm just saying fans probably have to have a little bit of skepticism, just to the sense of they may very well have happened, but there's not certainty as to exactly what happened. And, going into this fight, I thought it was a bad matchup for Joe Smith. I'd been saying that for weeks. I thought they made a mistake taking this fight. I thought they had great management getting him in with Von Farah on national TV, and he scored a dramatic knockout. Then took the Bernard Hopkins fight, a dramatic knockout on HBO. Great job getting him into that position from where he came, but taking this fight, again, unless there's a lot of money I don't know about, didn't make sense to me, played out the way I thought it might, except I thought Joe Smith might get stopped by Barrera. So that's what I thought was a positive for him, is he's still got the big left hook and right hand.
And I think a lot of this is, with the limited amateur background, I mean, you kind of got to put him in against guys that will teach him something. I mean, he's still a young guy, and I don't think this is going to ruin him. I think maybe it makes him better.
I agree with you. Now, I don't always feel that after all. In this case with Joe Smith, I agree for just the reasons you stated. He's relatively young for this division. He didn't have a big amateur background, and Sullivan Barrera did. And for him to survive Sullivan Barrera, that's the thing. See, you could get beat up too badly, and that's why I hope this jaw injury is not that serious, because I agree with what your thoughts were there, Mike, that I think at his age, without the amateur background, to survive Barrera, who's 35 years old and has got a great amateur pedigree, he actually could learn from this fight and potentially improve, because he didn't take it.
And I think he will. And the only reason I would be inclined to maybe believe the broken jaw is there's no reason not to believe Joe Smith. There is reason not to believe Manny Pacquiao and Freddie Roach. I'll leave it at that. Jeremiah, what was your take on this one?
What was my take? Yeah. John and I had talked a little bit about this before, about how it was possibly a bad style matchup, and it turned out to be that way. I mean, Sullivan Barrera, you got to give him credit. I mean, I think a lot of people underrated the guy. I mean, like John has talked about before, the Andre Ward victory over Barrera looks it looks better and better every time that Barrera wins. I mean, we forget that this is also a guy who's trained out of Abel Sanchez's gym. I think he still does so, if I'm not mistaken. But Barrera looked good. I mean, you could see his amateur experience at work. He understands the jab, timing, distance. He's got a little pop. He's a damn good fighter. I mean, he's a bona fide top 5 guy at 175 now. I mean, I just think he looked damn good. Smith Jr., it's hard to say whether he'll adapt. I mean, I always like to give guys the benefit of the doubt, but it's almost impossible to understand, what sort of mental aptitude these guys have and how quickly they'll apply it to the ring. But 175 is a tough division. I reckon Joe Smith will, he'll come back and he'll be okay, and he'll get back in the mix. But Barrera is a tough guy, and I think he's going to mix it up with the best of the best now.
All right, that brings us to Arthur Spika. Did I get that one right? Spilka, yeah. And I knew how to say that. I just spelled it wrong where I wrote it down. Lost in 4 rounds to Adam Baby Konacki. I mean, my biggest question here, Jeremiah, is why would you name a heavyweight that you think could be a champion? Why would his nickname be Baby?
Yeah, I don't know. If maybe it's his physical features. When you look at him, he kind of looks like a baby. I mean, he's bald.
He's bald. He's got some boobs. He's got a little belly. Yeah.
Yeah, that could be it. I mean, he does look kind of like a baby. I mean, it's not very intimidating. But then again, there are a number of fighters who have had nicknames like, Pretty Boy, stuff like that. So, anyways,
Pretty Boy is not Baby.
No, it's not. But it's still not. You think of it. You hear that announced over. You have Letterman or Buffer announcing that. It just doesn't, just doesn't have an intimidating ring to it. But I ended up watching the fight, and Spilka, a lot of us thought that he was a pretty good fighter, and I still think he is. But he just didn't look as if he could keep Konacki off him. I mean, Spilka kept landing punches, a number of good punches, but Baby or Babyface, whatever his nickname is.
Yeah, Baby walked right through it.
Yeah, he just kept walking right through it, and he just kept popping off the right hand. I mean, I think he's if I'm not mistaken, he's a New York State Golden Gloves winner, and that says more than most other states when there are a lot more people competing in it. But I like the fact that he kept at it. His jab, when I look at his physical assets, he doesn't really look like a major player to me. His jab is kind of rough. His sense of distance is all right. He looks like he can punch a bit and take some punches. I mean, he might. In my opinion, he might advance to the level of like Ruiz, but he just doesn't really look like a firecracker to me. He doesn't look like a guy who's going to make a big imprint. But he had a damn good game plan, stuck with it, and stopped him. And I think, I don't know, John, what do you think? It doesn't look quite as good for Wilder winning over him now.
Yeah, no, I don't. I don't think Wilder, outside of Stavern, even though you guys know I'm a believer in Wilder. I don't think the opponent level has been that great. Konacki, he's got that weird package. You see it. You don't see it much, but I'm trying to think. Yeah, Ruiz is one example, but there's other guys I've seen in the past. Ruiz is a little bit of a boxer, but every once in a while you'll get a heavyweight who he's kind of big and heavy, and he looks like he should have no stamina, but and maybe be a puncher, and he's a volume puncher who doesn't have that much pop, and Konacki fits that description. In other words, you'd be looking at him and think he'd have no stamina, but he's a high volume puncher for
like Scott Ledoux.
Yeah, Scott Ledoux.
There you go. I just wanted to bring it up because I ain't brought his name up in months, and I'm the king of I'm in charge of the Scott Ledoux fan club. Go ahead.
You're just itching.
Yeah, and even though he was a boxer, he wasn't a come forward volume puncher, but Buster.
No, he was kind of just sit there and take your shots to his face. But go ahead.
Buster Mathis Sr. was.
He had a soft belly and some boobs though, so I figured I'd bring it up. But he had an afro, so that made him cooler. Plus, he was the fighting Frenchman. That's almost as bad as being called Baby. But I digress.
But maybe Konacki. I mean, you could put him in with Brazil and get a total war. I'm sure that PBC and Al Heyman, they could look at something like that. Really, with some of these cards that they do put on national TV, they really ought to look more at fights like that because, fans want to see a good fight, as we were talking about earlier, and we were talking about the HBO context. I mean, if it's a real good fight, sometimes they're going to not care as much who's in there if they see it and you get that kind of a brawl. So maybe some thoughts about putting some good action matchups together like that. He might be, even though he doesn't look the part, Konachki, he could end up being in that kind of a fight just with that kind of volume, and you can see he's open to be hit, and even though he got Spielka out of there, he's not a huge puncher, so he could probably be in some action fights. I agree with Jeremiah. I don't know how far he can go. I guess, and again, I think that is a good comparison with Ruiz. Konachki would be, the heavyweight division hasn't really strengthened up as much as we thought it might, say, a year ago when you really look at it now. Maybe could he crack the legit top 10, maybe just barely get in there? I don't know. It'd be tough, but maybe it's possible.
Yeah, but you know what? 6 or 7 years ago, he probably could have got to the top 5.
Well, that's right. It's better than it was then.
It's better. I mean, you got 5 or 6 legit fighters in there now, and you got a few young ones that may be. We'll just have to see. That brings us to Marcus Brown, a fight that surprised me. I did not think Sean Monahan would make it out of the first round, but he did. Marcus Brown destroys him in the second round. I was impressed with Brown against Thomas Williams. I'm impressed against Monahan. I still want to see him against better competition, but, this was a solid performance against a guy who was not that good, John.
Yeah, I like Marcus Brown a lot. He had a tough fight with Kalajic. In fairness, I did not like how he looked in that fight, but as I discussed with Jeremiah last week, and I think this confirms my belief, I think we're just going to find out that Kalajic was that good, his only...
Yeah, and the other thing is this. I was disappointed by that, too, and when he fought Williams, it was on the Broner Granado's undercard in Cincinnati. I sat ringside at that fight, and Marcus Brown can pop. And, he's quick. For a puncher, he's pretty quick with the punches, too. I think he's got a shot. I don't know how good of a shot just because the light heavyweight division is stacked, but I don't think anybody can sleep on Marcus Brown.
No, what people were saying after the fight, and then some other people were discussing, because it could happen with the PBC connection if we can ever get Stevenson to fight somebody as dangerous as Marcus Brown. Oh, is Marcus Brown ready for Stevenson? And some people were thinking, no. Look, things change. The guard changes. Marcus Brown's ready for Adonis Stevenson. And
I think the bigger question now with the quality of competition Stevenson's fought, is he ready for Marcus Brown?
That's what I think. I'll take. I haven't even seen the odds yet on it prospectively if it's going to happen, but there are these sites, and got to give it to the British. They have some sites that'll have it out there, even if it's theoretical. I haven't seen a line on it yet, but I'll take, no matter what it's going to be, I'll take Brown in that one. I think it's time, and I don't think Stevenson's ready for that level of competition now. So, maybe that does happen, and if it does, I think they got to sacrifice Stevenson to somebody sooner or later. It's just going to be a question of who.
Yeah. All right. Brown Monahan, what was your takeaway on it, Jeremiah? I think it's pretty much what we all expected.
Yeah, it was a nice whipping. A lot of people had hopes for Monahan, hoping that maybe he was the real deal. But the whole time that I've seen him, he was just never that impressive. Brown, I'm like you guys. I think he has a lot of good natural assets. He whipped Monahan's butt. This just was not. There were clearly levels to this, and Brown is clearly near the top of the top. My only thing about Brown is, though he's looked good. And, Mike, you kind of touched on this before about how stacked 175 is. The problem with him and the problem with the division is while he has the goods, we know his chin is not iron. It's not steel. And there are a lot of good right-hand punchers in the division. Bivol, Beterbiev, Kovalev, etc. There's a lot of good right-hand punchers. Joe Smith. That's going to pose a problem for Brown. And that might prevent him from getting on top of the mountain. But, I look forward to seeing him in his next fight.
Yeah, most definitely. I really like Brown. He's an exciting fighter. He can punch. Brings us up to, we got Omar Figueroa with a third-round knockout over Robert Guerrero. Guerrero retired afterwards. Guerrero was a hell of a fighter. I just think he was never the same when he moved up in weight. But I was impressed that Figueroa was off for 17 months and dominated this way, John.
Now, this is when I talked about Selby and Eubank earlier, this was going to be my final example of what you want to do is Figueroa was in a fight. The only real mystery was that he'd been off for 17 months. So, was he going to be affected after taking that beating in the second half of the fight against DeMarco where, he would have some trouble with Guerrero. But, people generally expected him to win. He was a favorite. But he was not as big of a favorite as the other guys like Eubank and Selby. But Omar Figueroa took care of business. Omar Figueroa took a situation where maybe he's expected to most likely win, but he made more out of it by taking care of business, impressively getting Guerrero out of there. And when Omar Figueroa is in shape and right, now I know he was fighting Guerrero, but that looked like that Omar Figueroa to me on Saturday night. He can punch, and he's got talent. So you saw the flashes of that. He got himself, back in the mix, and he's talking about 140. I say forget that talk. Welterweight is where the top fighters are, along with light heavyweight, and that's where the money is. So stay at welterweight, but just be in shape. That's what I'm saying for him. Be in shape, and let's say again, I'm not overrating this win, but this wasn't talked about. But I think because they're PBC guys, you can talk about. I don't think it's crazy again, provided it's an in shape Figueroa. He doesn't match up all that bad against a Sean Porter. Keith Thurman. Those guys are both his height or shorter, and Figueroa can punch. So it doesn't mean I'm going to necessarily pick Figueroa over those guys, but those could be action fights with an in-shape Figueroa.
All right, so Jeremiah, what's your take on Figueroa and his shot if he was to go to welterweight?
Yeah, well, personally, I don't really think he can handle any of the best. I mean, I'm just not that impressed with him, to be honest with you. I mean, you go back through his previous fight, and if I'm not mistaken, he struggled to beat Ricky Burns. I mean, I think he needed a little hometown cooking to do it. He was outboxed by Jerry Belmontes, in my opinion. He looked flabby here, and it would be nice to see him show up in shape. I mean, the problem is he might be at his best at like 135 because I don't see he looked fine and well against Robert Guerrero, but we also understand that Robert Guerrero is somebody who started off at 126. But it was a good fight. I mean, talking about the fight itself, Guerrero came right out of the gate and started swinging on Figueroa and landed a good number of punches, but Guerrero just looks slow. You could tell that he's been past it for a number of years. I mean, he's struggled time and time again in the last few years. I mean, as soon as he moved up to in fact, when he was at 140, I didn't really see him as much of a threat to anybody at the top. I mean, I know it got overturned, but he was beaten up pretty good by Orlando Salido. Of course, the decision was overturned because I think Salido had, I don't know what it was, weight loss supplements or something in his system. But yeah, he was beat up pretty nicely there. Figueroa to me he's just too hittable. I mean, he may have the size to adjust at 147, but I really don't like his defense, and I don't think he poses many problems for the guys at the top.
All right, so that brings us to the biggest fight of the week, or what looked like it. Didn't live up to what I thought it would be. I don't know about you guys, but we got Miguel Berchelt against Takashi Miura. What was your take on that, Jeremiah?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us had high expectations for this one. I certainly did. I mean, you watch Berchelt versus Vargas, and then Miura versus I can't really remember who he fought, but they were on the same card, and I think a lot of
all three fights on the Fox card were entertaining.
Yeah, a lot of us were salivating at the mouth. We were like, put the winners together, and this would be a good one. But the thing about Berchelt, and you got to give him credit, is he boxed smartly. I mean, he could have went in there and slugged with Miura, and it would have turned out to be a much better fight. Who knows? Miura could have won. Both guys have big power. But he just chose not to fight risky. He boxed a little bit. Landed from the outside, moved. It wasn't that flattering of a performance. I mean, Berchelt didn't really awe me with his ability, because Miura is just, I don't know, he just relies far too much on that big left hand, and his ability to cut off the ring is almost non-existent. So Berchelt, he played it safe. He got the win. It was a good fight. The good thing about the division is that there are a lot of bangers there. He can he's got a lot of options there. I mean, there are a lot of good fights to be made, and I reckon he'll be near the top, but he's certainly not one guy at 135 who I think will, light the world on fire and become one of the best guys there.
Yeah, and John, my takeaway was, Burchell, if he would have stood there and went to war with Miura would have had a chance, but the way he fought was the way he had to fight to ensure he was going to win.
I think it was more that he didn't want to take risk. I felt like, as I watched that whole 12 rounds, I mean, Miura is just a punching bag at this point. I mean, he's got a looping left hand that's got a little bit of thud to it, and he's just target practice. I mean, he's completely defensively inept, and I think Burchell could have stood still a little bit, opened up on him, and gotten him out of there. But I just think he chose to not take any risk there. That he figured, I can hit this guy at will without even taking any chances, and I'm just going to do that for 12 rounds rather than stand still a little bit and score a knockout and get this guy out of here and maybe take a couple in return. His only loss was by first-round KO, so maybe he's got that in the back of his mind. I don't know, but I felt watching that he really could have gotten Miura out of there if he just stepped on the gas pedal and stopped moving just a little bit. And I was waiting in the later round to see if he was going to do it, and he didn't do it. And I thought Max Kellerman's commentary was absolutely bizarre, and I think Roy Jones and Jim Lampley were kind of thinking the same thing as we got into the last couple of rounds, and he was talking about Miura could still pull this thing out. Well, I think Max is watching a different fight than at least a lot of people were at that point.
I think Max is usually watching a different fight than a lot of people.
I think he's on his
Roy
phone
a lot of times, but what the hell?
But
that'll bring us to a little boxing news. I know there are rumors of Deontay Wilder defending his title against Ortiz maybe in November. What's your take on that fight, Jeremiah, if it comes off?
Oh, man, well, let's hope. Let's all keep our fingers crossed and hope that it comes off because, I mean, I know all of you guys, just like us, and all of the fans have been waiting for Wilder to kind of step it up, and it was a big disappointment when the Povetkin fight fell through, and so now we finally got Wilder, or we're hoping that Wilder will finally take a guy who I believe is in everybody's top 10. Ortiz, unfortunately, hasn't looked that good in recent outings. I mean, he looks flat-footed and he follows guys around too much. But I think it's an interesting styles contrast, and I like the fight. I hope it happens.
Yeah, me too. What's your take, John?
Yeah, I think, I talked about going into Joe Smith and Sullivan Barrera. I felt that was, at that point, a bad management decision with Joe Smith and his team to take that fight. I think we're seeing the opposite here with Deontay Wilder. The Luis Ortiz selection of opponent is very good not because the fight doesn't pose some risk, but Ortiz, is on the wrong side of 35 now. He's 37. Hasn't looked as good in his last two fights yet. Myself and everybody else has him in their top. I have him third. Nobody else really has him any lower than 4, pretty much. So you got a guy that's in everybody's top 3 or 4, so you'll get respect for the victory. So it's good management there that you're taking an opponent that the fans want to see and you'll get some respect, but it's an opponent that because of his age and because of how he's looked in his last couple of fights. And another interesting point of it to me was I was reading up on this some this week, and I saw that for the way, not the only good thing the WBC's ever done is some of this drug testing stuff. And Wilder has passed his VADA test for the year, and Ortiz, of course, had tested for PEDs positively earlier in his career. So the reason I just brought that up is that we know then by testing, and you had the whole Povetkin situation. If Wilder's a clean guy, and he's pretty thin when he comes in shape, so there's some evidence there too. If Wilder's a clean guy, and if Ortiz has struggled with this in the past, and there's going to be strict VADA testing, you don't really want to say disadvantage because Ortiz is not supposed to be taking PEDs, but disadvantage in the sense that he's not going to be what he was a few years back. So these are all reasons I think that it's good opponent selection for Wilder, though. I don't think it's one of these sure thing type of a things. I mean, there's risk there. Ortiz can punch. I've got him number 3. He's a totally legitimate opponent. He's undefeated. But if you're it's the right opponent to take the chance with, and that's where I'm looking at the Wilder management strategy as opposed to the Joe Smith management strategy with Barrera, and saying this is an example of kind of the right risk to take, where I thought Joe Smith and Sullivan Barrera was kind of the wrong risk to take.
All right, I think it's a fight that won't happen because I think there is a risk, and I think if there's a risk, Wilder's going to stay away from it. It's the way it's been so far. I mean, the only reason they may do it is because Ortiz has not looked as good lately. But other than that, I mean, Ortiz has fought and beat the better competition, I think. He can punch. We know Wilder. I don't think Wilder can take a punch. I mean, the only thing is this, Wilder's younger, and as Jeremiah said, Ortiz doesn't have the quickest feet in the world. But if Ortiz hits him, Ortiz wins the fight, if he catches him clean.
Stavern caught him clean a couple times, and Wilder didn't get.
I don't think Stavern hits like Ortiz, though.
I don't think he hits like Ortiz, but he's a good puncher.
What do you base that on, though? Knocking out Chris Arreola?
Yeah, I mean, I think when at the time that he knocked out Arreola, the way he did it, that was different than anybody else had done.
Well, it's because Arreola had been knocked out a few times, too, hadn't he?
No, he got stopped by Klitschko on his feet at that point, but that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember that. That
Jeremiah.
post. Any of you guys remember the post-fight questionnaire for Arreola afterwards? I don't know. He was crying, and I don't know. It's just one thing that kind of.
He always was crying, wasn't he?
Yeah, always. That's okay. I mean, he eventually the smile came because he could go back to his Sundays and snow cones.
He used to talk.
Maybe Chris Arreola should have been called Baby.
He used to talk about getting to the cervezas.
Yeah, well, and he was on a lot of them.
Yeah, I think we could believe him.
Oh,
I don't know. It might have been more chicken wings, even from looking at his belly, though. Probably a little bit of both. We got some more heavyweight news. Tyson Fury may retire. And me and Jeremiah were talking about this before, John. And if he retires, it's just going to be until he runs out of money from all the coke and everything, and he'll be back.
Well, I was thinking the same thing before we came on, because I'd read that story, and I find it somewhat believable, because I think Fury, unlike a lot of fighters, he may be disturbed enough that I think this talk might be real, but I agree with what you guys said, that even if it's a few-year retirement, when there's no money, and it starts looking better. But here's what I was thinking of that before we got on there, and this is what I kind of wanted to compare it to, although it's nowhere near as severe a situation, of course, and of course Tyson Fury has not committed any crime, is they offered Tony Aiello Jr., HBO did, 7 figures for his first fight at a prison to be with Felix Trinidad, and he turned it down, thinking that he was going to rebuild, and of course we know how that turned out. What I'm getting to is, if Tyson Fury is going to retire, which basically, let's face it, he's been off over 18 months. He basically is retired already, okay? It's just a matter if he's going to come back or not. Here's what I'm suggesting for Tyson Fury. If he's going to do this, just come right back at Anthony Joshua and say you have the lineal title, even if it's not going to work out well for you, and get the big paycheck. Because as long as he's going to have been off, he's going to come back against some lesser guys and look bad, and fans aren't going to be very excited for him to fight Joshua or one of the top guys at that point. So I think if he's going to mess around like this, he better think about coming right back against Joshua someday and getting that big payday.
Yeah, and my question for you, Jeremiah, is this. If Tyson Fury retires as the undefeated heavyweight champion, do you put him ahead of Rocky Marciano?
I put him ahead of James J. Jeffries because he had more wins. So
Jeffries ended up losing because he came back.
Yeah. You know what, though? I mean, just...
And you can't put him ahead of James J. Jeffries. James J. Jeffries beat better opponents.
You know what? Tyson Fury is one of the greatest ever, and you guys are just naive.
Well, I mean, you still are in love with him because he sings that freaking song at their every fight to his woman.
Yeah, he swoons me. I can't lie. I mean, he's got the voice
I
of
think
an
he's going to come back because eventually she's going to get tired of that money not coming in, and she's going to make him fight, or she'll end up, going somewhere else.
Yeah, she wants to hear the songs in the ring. She doesn't want to hear him on his couch while he's, slurping down a Slurpee or something.
Yeah, and snort some coke off of a.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, when the supplier stops, dealing out and Tyson's got to ask for some cash in advance, then yeah, I mean, it's not going to happen. But like John said, I mean, Fury's just going to have to go right after Joshua. I mean, that's even if Fury takes another year off, that will still end up selling big. I mean,
he'll still make $10-20 million fighting Joshua. We'll put 90,000 people in Wembley.
Oh yeah.
And Joshua will kick his ass.
Exactly. I mean, the longer, and it's unfortunate. I mean, I think Tyson Fury is a good heavyweight. I really think he's a good boxer. I mean, I don't think he gets enough credit for his skills. I mean, yeah, he had a hiccup against, Steve Cunningham, who knocked him down, but a lot of people forget that he put on a fine performance afterwards and ended up stopping Cunningham in pretty brutal fashion.
Yeah,
I mean,
Steve Cunningham's a good fighter.
Yeah, Cunningham is a good fighter. I mean, Fury is a good fighter. He's got good skills, especially for, what is he in fighting shape, like 270 pounds? I mean, he's a good fighter, but unfortunately, we've seen this time and time again. Boxing is just, it's like this. We get a lot of guys with character flaws. Unfortunately, a lot of them, their careers end up, too quickly, and Fury's just going to be another casualty.
All right, and that brings us to Sean Porter calling out Danny Garcia. You think Danny Garcia will get anywhere near Sean Porter, Jeremiah?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Porter looks as if he's hoping that the WBC will order the fight, because they're hoping that it'll be for an interim belt, some BS belt, whatever. But I don't think Garcia, as lightly as he's been moved at times, I don't think he wants to do that, especially in a comeback fight. I mean, I think he'll probably look for, something like, I mean, he might take a chance in a guy like Luis Collazo, but a guy like Sean Porter, I just can't see it happening, at least not this quickly.
Same question, John.
I'm hoping for it. I think the fight makes sense. I do agree, with Jeremiah's thinking in the sense that, the one flaw of Danny Garcia in recent fights, and we all three of us, I believe, agree on this, he just doesn't punch enough. And Sean Porter is going to put pressure on you and make you do things. So is that a kind of fight Danny Garcia is going to want to be in? I don't think he should be afraid of Porter, though. I mean, I think Porter didn't really look that great against Berto, and Berto doesn't have anything left. So I think that I think it would be a good fight for both men, and I think it'd be an interesting fight and a good fight for the fans. That's what we all want. PBC, a lot of, they could use some, I mean, they got some good fights that have been going to Showtime. They really are in that position again where they need a good fight on basic cable or network TV. This could fill that bill to me. But again, we'll have to see if PBC and Al Haymon, if they put it together. I like the fight. I like the timing of the fight. If we're all looking towards Thurman, Errol Spence, when Thurman gets healed up, from his shoulder, then this would be a nice fight in the interim to see who might be next. I think it makes sense, but I don't know how close it is to fruition.
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for this week. But next week, we will have a fight that is the fight I'm most looking forward to this year, Mikey Garcia against Adrian Broner. So we'll have a preview of that next week, so make sure you come back to thegruelingtruth.net. Check that out. I want to let everybody know that there is now a Grueling Truth app in the iTunes store. You can go hit that up and get all of our podcasts, be it boxing, football, baseball, basketball. We talked about Sean Porter. Sean Porter was on a ringside boxing show this past weekend with Dennis Taylor, John Raspani, so make sure you check that out on thegruelingtruth.net and the app. You can hear all of our shows on iHeart, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher. Anywhere you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for John Einreinhofer, Jeremiah Preisser, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.